great to be here today, and thank you very much for having me along. I'm really happy to be presenting for Ovarian Cancer Australia and the Cancer Council Queensland. I work here actually, just next door in the cancer counselling service, so it wasn't hard at all for me to get here. Okay, so just to give you a little bit of an idea of what I'm hoping to kind of go through today, initially it's just kind of discussing common experiences around diagnosis with ovarian cancer, but also in terms of tolerating treatment, changes to the way that you think and feel across kind of the psychological and emotional spectrum. Also going to be talking about some useful strategies for coping with uncertainty and for coping with difficult feelings. And I'm hopeful that we can have a little bit of a play with actually practicing some of the things that we're going to be talking about today. The final one is looking at fear of cancer recurrence, which is a really common fear that comes up once you've been diagnosed with cancer, and also finding hope. The impact of a cancer diagnosis, the first thing that comes up is often shock, because cancer doesn't usually fit that well into how we think about illness within our society. Often when we get sick with something, like for instance chickenpox or a cold or the flu, we feel pretty terrible. We go to the doctor, we get a diagnosis of what's going on, we get treatment, we feel better, we move on with our lives. But often with cancer, when you're diagnosed, you're not always feeling terrible. You sometimes are feeling pretty good, pretty normal. And this diagnosis kind of comes out of nowhere, and maybe it's picked up with some kind of screening or because something else is going on. And then all of a sudden you're having to grapple with treatment, which usually doesn't make you feel terribly good, makes you feel a lot worse. And then once treatment's finished, it's not really like a clear ending point. It's not like a line in the sand in the way that it would be with chickenpox or something else like that. This continues to impact on how you think about your life and how you kind of move through your life over the longer term. We often experience a loss of safety, a loss of control, and a loss of predictability in life. So, a cancer diagnosis feels like a huge threat. And often it can kind of shatter some of the assumptions that we might hold about ourselves and about the world and the way the world works. If you've kind of had a good enough life up until that point, often we kind of tend to think about the world as being kind of a safe place. It's predictable, it makes sense, there's an order to things. A cancer diagnosis can shatter some of those assumptions that we hold about the world because it's unpredictable, there's no way to make sense of every cancer diagnosis, and it's happened to lots and lots of people who haven't done anything terribly bad in their lives. Often we kind of have this idea that good things happen to good people, but when bad things happen to good people, that's a really difficult idea for us to try and incorporate. We kind of spend a lot of time thinking, how did this happen? Why has this happened? And we can get really stuck. So it's a threat to our sense of survival, it's a threat to our lifestyle, also a threat to our identity as well, in that maybe we can't keep doing the things that we like to do while we're having treatment or after we've had treatment. There's a lot of changes. So in terms of the psychological impact, loss and grief, and sometimes that's just loss of that sense of safety that I referred to in the world. Grief about changes to your body, changes to the way that things work, recognising your own mortality, vulnerability. There's often fear of recurrence, a lot of uncertainty, and people really typically experience a lot of intrusive thoughts about these themes. Ovarian cancer very much impacts on sexuality as well, and it can also lead to a sense of changed identity. There's also a real difficulty that we experience with cancer where there is a lot of suffering, there is a lot of challenge, but sometimes we're not validated in acknowledging or recognising that suffering or that challenge. Because there's kind of, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later, but that kind of tyranny of positive thinking where you're told you've just got to keep positive, just keep going. Don't think about the bad things that could happen because it's not good for you. It's kind of the collective wisdom sometimes, unfortunately, which then makes us feel really disconnected from people around us. So just got a couple of quotes here from people who have been struggling with ovarian cancer in particular. If I'm getting better, then why do I feel so sad? Why do I feel so scared? I know I should be grateful, but I just get so angry at times. I can't believe that I can't have a baby. And these quotes I think were chosen because they do represent this kind of conflict that we have, where we're told that we need to be a certain way or think a certain way, and it's really, really hard, or if not impossible, to always hold that perspective. Okay, so I guess starting to talk about, I guess one of the take-home messages from that first little portion of the talk today is that, you know, feeling distress, feeling difficulty, feeling separate from other people who maybe haven't had a cancer experience or just can't kind of approach that content is really normal and makes a lot of sense, and I think most people feel that way at some point. But uncertainty and fear of cancer recurrence. Uncertainty is a big part of what happens when you have a cancer diagnosis, because all of a sudden the things that you thought you knew about your life and what was going to be happening suddenly get changed really quickly. All of a sudden you're booking your life around medical appointments or treatment appointments or physio appointments, OT appointments, whatever, and you're losing contact with work, perhaps losing contact with social circles as well because you're not well. So you kind of really feel a loss of that control in a very practical way. But also that uncertainty is there because there are no guarantees that come with cancer treatment. As well as we can treat cancer at the moment, no one gets a guarantee at the end of treatment saying, yep, that's it, you know, you're finished now. And so that's really hard to kind of make space for, is that ongoing uncertainty. You have a greater sense of that. Oh. So these are also really common experiences around that fear of recurrence. So every time I feel a pain or something twinges, my brain automatically presses the cancer button. This is something that's a really common experience for people who've had cancer. It's like walking through life with a little black cloud on top of me, and I think that one day it's going to rain on me. So there's this sense that it's kind of there in the background in a way that, you know, this threat wasn't in your life up until this point. This is a really kind of handy way that I like to think about emotion regulation, which can be quite a big topic to start to think about. And I really like this model because it's really simple. It's called the 3-circle model. And I guess the reason I kind of wanted to talk about it today is that it helps us to understand a little bit of what's going on in our brains, what's going on in our bodies, and what's happening also emotionally and in our minds when we're kind of getting stuck into some of these scary patterns of thinking or scary ways of feeling. So in this model, there's the 3 circles, and we all kind of have them. So one is our threat system, which kind of operates to protect us, to keep us safe. It's our better safe than sorry system, and this kind of is a really sensitive but old-fashioned system that developed when we were cave people, basically. So this is kind of the oldest part of our brain. We also have a drive system, which motivates us towards resources. So this is about accomplishment, it's about enjoyment, it's about getting the things that we need to survive in life. And then we also have our soothing system, which is how we connect with other people, how we experience warmth and contentment, and how we enjoy our lives. Now, we actually need all of these systems in order to be able to live a good, normal and healthy life. But sometimes these circles can get out of balance. So sometimes our threat circle can get really big, and we don't really feel like we can easily connect with our soothing circle, our sense of warmth and contentment as much in our lives. So that circle can shrink. Our drive system can also get really big, because often if we're feeling scared, we'll start to do a lot more to try and take care of that sense of threat, keeping busy so that you can keep distracted so that you don't have to kind of feel some of these difficult feelings. The tricky part is that when you have a loss or a trauma like cancer, treatment or diagnosis, our threat systems get really sensitized, so they turn on at the drop of a hat. And all of a sudden we can feel quite unsafe in our lives and feeling like we're seeing threats everywhere when there might not be any. Part of that is what happens in the brain. So when our threat system turns on, our fight or flight system comes online, and that's the system that, you know, we typically think about as being characterized by anger or anxiety. So having that adrenaline flooding your body, having your body being kind of turned on in order to prepare itself to meet a threat. When that happens, we actually start to think with the back part of our brain, which is the more old-fashioned part of our brain, which doesn't really think flexibly or broadly or creatively. It's very black and white, and it's very, very difficult when we're in threat mode to think kind of with our logical, rational, perspective-taking, empathy, feeling part, the front part of our brain. So part of what we need to be able to do is calm down our bodies to be able to get our whole brain back online so that we can think a little bit more clearly or a little bit more in a more of a balanced way about what's happening. So what we're going to be talking about today is also using our soothing system, ways that we can engage with that, but also ways that we can find some more helpful patterns of thinking. Because one of the tricky parts about our threat system is that it's really self-perpetuating. So if you have a scary thought about something, often our bodies are immediately flooded with feeling. So you have a scary thought about the future, you feel terrible. Because you're feeling terrible, it makes the thought seem more true. So because the thought seems more true, we then feel worse, and we kind of flip-flop backwards and forwards in this kind of really vicious cycle of fear. Does that kind of make sense? It kind of just builds upon itself. All right, so I guess the other thing that's really important to notice is that with uncertainty, there are often really clear triggers that we might experience that lead us to kind of have these sorts of fears or this sense of uncertainty coming up in our lives. Often people kind of highlight and identify follow-up tests or follow-up appointments as being a time when anxiety will kind of start to build in the days and weeks beforehand. Then you might get through the appointment and then it drops off after treatment. Also, other personal triggers can be changes in your body, as I said before, things being a little bit different, feeling a little bit unusual, feeling a little bit strange. We also start to look out for anything out of the ordinary, anything that kind of physically reminds us of the time that we were diagnosed with cancer or part of our treatment as well, can often be really quickly kind of triggering our threat systems off. So you might smell a particular smell that's kind of associated with visiting the hospital, or you might hear a particular sound, which is also associated with maybe being in the waiting room, and you can kind of have this flood of feelings through the body. We also have really noisy bodies. So, actually it's quite normal for us to experience lots of aches and pains and twinges and, difficulties in our body in day-to-day life. But those kinds of pains and twinges, which are normally there, all the sounds, are quite easy to dismiss if we haven't had a sensitizing experience like a cancer diagnosis. So often we kind of start to become more hypervigilant to our bodies, and then we start to notice more, and then you feel something, you think, oh, I better pay attention to that, and then we kind of monitor it for a while, and then we think, oh, should I take it to the doctor or not? But because we're noticing things that are there, that then reinforces the fact that we should be paying attention. So then we've got to notice more, and we kind of just get wound up in it. So the other kind of thing, aside from hypervigilance, the other kind of pattern that we can get stuck in is where we kind of either try to avoid thinking about it altogether, as I said before, using our drive system, just keeping busy, keeping moving, going to work, doing the things, and then, or we can kind of ruminate on something where we get stuck in thinking about loops. And often what we see is that if you use a lot of avoidance of difficulty, it will mean that you'll have more intrusive thoughts at other times. So usually during the day, we can kind of be quite busy, we can keep moving, we can keep ourselves distracted and away from threat. But then at bedtime, or trying to go to sleep, or trying to relax and do something enjoyable with friends, that can be then when these thoughts come up. Your brain's like, oh good, you're going to bed, you've got nothing to do. Now you can figure this out. And it's really, really tricky because then it impacts on your sleep and then, on and on and on. So we also can get really overwhelmed by thoughts at different points in time. And when we feel like we can't control those thoughts, that then makes us even more panicked about our thoughts and where they're going. So there's a really excellent experiment in psychology. This is actually this probably sounds a little bit lame now, but this is what got me interested in psychology in the first place. Has anyone heard of the white bear experiment? No? Okay. So I heard about this in year 12 when I went to some kind of vacation school down here in Brisbane. And basically they got two groups of college students, and the first group was told, okay, you've got to come in and sit down here, please. We have some magazines for you. The experiment hasn't started yet, but for the next 15 minutes, it's critical, it's absolutely critical to this project that you don't think about polar bears. And I'd invite you all now to stop thinking about polar bears, okay? Now, it's really important that you don't think about where they live, what they eat, what they look like, what their cubs look like, any of that. Don't think about any of that. And what are you guys thinking about? Polar bears, yeah. And so they said to this group of kids, okay, each time you think about a polar bear, mark it down on the paper, but just try really hard not to think about it. Okay. And then they got a second group and they said, okay, you guys come in and sit down. There's some magazines here, you know, whatever, same as the other group. If you think about a polar bear while you're waiting for the experiment to start, just make a note here, but you know, it doesn't really matter, whatever. And who do you think thought about polar bears the most? Yeah, these guys who were told, don't think about it, whatever you do, don't think about it. So that's the really tricky part about our thoughts, is it's a bit like a beach ball sometimes, you know. The more you try to kind of push some thoughts down and hold them down below the water, like you're at the beach, the more they just pop right back up. And so we can get this really adversarial kind of relationship with parts of ourselves. It's really hard work, it's really tiring, and then if we add in the pressure of the tyranny of positive thinking, which I'm again going to talk about a bit later, makes it even more scary to think, I shouldn't be having these scary thoughts. I'm trying my hardest not to have these scary thoughts, and yet here they are. No matter how hard I try not to have them, they're here. I'm losing control of my mind. So an alternative to kind of trying to avoid these really intrusive thoughts is using a bit of mindfulness, where we start to practice opening up to different parts of our experience for small portions of time, and learning a new way of relating to them. So yeah, I guess part of being diagnosed with cancer, or having treatment for cancer, or living after you've completed treatment for cancer, is that it brings up a lot of difficult thoughts and feelings. And it's important to acknowledge that yes, paying attention to some difficult thoughts and feelings can be very painful. So it makes sense that of course we want to avoid them where we can. But we know that blocking them out with the white bear experiment just makes them even sometimes stronger, makes them more powerful, makes them more insistent. So sometimes what we need to practice is trying to stop pushing those difficult thoughts aside, and trying just to allow them to be there. And we do this by practicing some mindfulness meditation, where we actually just start to acknowledge and observe different parts of our experience in a few different ways. Sometimes we find that by doing this, stepping out of that battle, the thoughts themselves can actually become quieter. They may fade away on their own. This might not always happen, but it can happen at times. And this is also about kind of trying to become a bit more whole, so feeling more connected to all of the different parts of your life and all of the different parts of your experience. Okay, so this is really kind of a basic 4 steps to mindful awareness that I'm just going to run through. So first, what we're wanting to do is, rather than just kind of always getting really caught up in our experience, is to first practice stepping back and actually noticing how you're feeling, noticing what you're saying to yourself, noticing what this kind of internal monologue is saying. Because often when we're experiencing distressing thoughts about cancer, it's not actually about where we are right now in this moment. Oftentimes the really scary thoughts are about what's to come, what's coming in a year's time, in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, or in a few months' time, a few weeks' time. So the thoughts that we have that scare us the most are when we feel least in control. And if you're forecasting ahead, taking your attention away from where you are, you actually don't have any choice or control about what happens in this future that you're imagining, but you do have choice and control in this moment. That's the only one that we ever really do. The other thing that can happen is we can also have painful memories that come up. So then when we go back in time and experience pain or regret or suffering, that then becomes present as well. So what we can do is practicing coming into contact with where we are. Because when you're lying in your bed at 2 a.m. and you're doing all your best problem solving, I know that's when I do my best problem solving, I'm not thinking about the fact that I'm lying in my bed on a comfy pillow under a comfy doona. I'm thinking about, presenting to a forum the next day. So coming back, noticing how you're feeling in your body, noticing what your thoughts are saying, and being curious about our feelings means that sometimes we can be less overwhelmed by them. We can start to then recognise patterns of unhelpful thinking that kind of come up for us. And then we can start to practice accepting some of these thoughts and feelings, making space for them. So sort of seeing it rather than being like the beach ball that we're trying to hold under the water, difficult thoughts and feelings can kind of become like a wave, which kind of comes up, crests, peaks, and then washes out on the sand. And if we can kind of practice that way of relating to it, where we're not fighting against the wave, we're just allowing it to come and fall, knowing that you can notice these different parts of your experience and refocus on where you actually are. We can start to feel moments, to begin with, of control and choice. Okay, so how do we do that? I'm going to talk to you a bit more and then we're actually going to do it, because talking about mindfulness is a bit like going to a restaurant and listening to the waiter describe the specials. It's great. Sounds nice to listen to all of the food description, but unless you actually eat the food, you're not going to get any benefit from it. Just in the same way, if you don't actually practice mindfulness, that's just kind of like a mental exercise, I suppose, in observing. So grounding our attention in the present moment helps us to turn down the volume on our intrusive thoughts, and we use all of our 5 senses, because often, as you're sitting here listening to me, hopefully listening to me today, there's all sorts of information that's coming in through your senses which you are filtering out, you're disregarding. So there might be other sounds that are kind of coming in which your brain is choosing to ignore. There might be details in what you can see. You've kind of been in this room all day, so you kind of feel like you know enough about this room that your brain doesn't really feel like it has to pay attention to this particular room anymore. There might be smells that you're not able to kind of notice anymore. And your body sitting in the chair, you might not really be tuning into how your body's feeling terribly much unless there's a big problem. So what we start to do is we focus on the breath, we notice points of contact with our body, where we are, and then we come back to noticing all of these other different aspects of our senses in this moment. So I'm going to invite you all to join with me. So I'd really like it if you would all like to kind of give this a go and kind of come along with me. If you don't want to, of course, please don't. Just do your own thing for the next few minutes. But we're going to practice grounding our attention in the body, and we're going to practice seeing if we can notice our thoughts, because one of the key problems that people kind of come to mindfulness with is that it should be this kind of zen, relaxing, calm state, and it's really often not. Mindfulness is often quite a busy space because our minds are very busy, but we can observe that and we can bring our attention back again and again. That's where the real training in mindfulness lies, is having your mind wander and then gently bringing it back again. So if you'd like to take part, I'd encourage you just to pop your feet on the floor, because this helps us to kind of feel stable and supported. Sitting in the chair in a way that makes you feel comfortable. So if you want to take a bit of a stretch or kind of change the way your body is, go for it, adjust your posture. Either choosing to gently close down through your eyes, or if you don't feel comfortable with your eyes closed, just lowering and softening your gaze, almost as if you're staring through the floor a few feet ahead of you. And as you sit with your eyes closed, just turning your attention from the busyness of today, from all of the things that you've been talking about and listening to and learning, turning your attention from outside to within. As you begin to notice the fact that you're breathing today. And noticing how it feels as you're breathing, noticing the physical sensations of each breath. Perhaps noticing where you can feel your breath most in this moment. It might be at the tip of the nose, where the air is a little cooler as you breathe in compared to when you breathe out. Or it might be at the back of the throat, in your chest or in your belly, or even in your ribs. Wherever it is for you today, just holding your attention here as steadily as you can. And observing the breath as it passes in and passes out. Now, as you're sitting and breathing, also noticing perhaps a sense of your feet in contact with the floor beneath you. As you notice the points of contact that exist here. The ball of the foot and the heel. Maybe a sense of your shoe on your foot. The temperature of your feet. And also noticing all of the points at which your body is in contact with the chair. Seeing if you can connect with any sense of stability or security, or being held by the chair, being held in place by gravity as you sit and breathe here together today. Seeing if you can notice the touch of the air on your skin, the temperature of the air. And noticing where your hands are resting in your lap. As we sit and feel our bodies breathe, begin to expand your awareness now to take in a sense of the sounds that surround you. Almost like you're a radio antenna, just sitting back and listening, not needing to go out and hunt for sounds, but just allowing them to gently arrive for you. Sounds inside the room. Perhaps in the background. Sounds from outside of the room. So we sit and breathe and listen. If there's any thoughts coming up, any distractions or any feelings as we're going through, perhaps just saying, hello there, thought. Hello there, discomfort. Hello there, boredom. Hello there, peace. Hello there, nervousness. And coming back to your breath again and again. As we practice just noticing, holding our attention steady with this moment, with our senses and the breath and the body. So we afford ourselves the luxury of taking it breath by breath, just for a moment. Letting go of any need to get somewhere or to feel a certain way or think a certain way. So we just breathe. few moments, we're going to begin to step out of this short grounding exercise. So just as you're ready, beginning to open and close your hands, perhaps wriggling your toes or pointing your feet, taking a stretch of the body, whatever way makes most sense for you, and choosing to open your eyes just as you're ready. Okay. So, what was that like?
Relaxing.
It was relaxing. Oh, excellent. Got some good beginner's luck.
You
Any?
have a very good calming voice.
Do I?
Yes.
Wow.
I need to get you on a podcast.
Oh, God. I don't know, my children don't seem to think I'm very calming. Anything else? Was it difficult at any point? It's okay if it was. No? Well, that's good. And today, I guess, it's not 2 a.m, you're not in your bed, you're not worrying about all sorts of different things. Your threat system isn't going off like a frog in a sock on a Wednesday, hopefully. Today, you've kind of been thinking a lot and talking with people who maybe understand your experience and getting some information, which has hopefully been helpful. So, you know, you've been connecting. And when we connect, that's when our soothing system really comes into play, when we feel understood, when we feel heard, when we feel validated. So I think that's probably a big part of why it was relaxing today. It won't always be relaxing, but it doesn't mean you're not doing it right. Does that make sense? Yeah. So this is a great cartoon by Michael Lunik. I know he's been a bit controversial recently and he's copped a bit of a beating, but he often does have some helpful perspectives. So we've got the way that life is supposed to be and the way that life actually is, and it's kind of falling off the sign there. So hope is a really important thing for us to have, but it can be a bit of a double-edged sword at times. So it can provide motivation for us to do the things we need to do the hard things, whether that's, you know, getting through chemotherapy or getting through radiation therapy. And having optimism can help us to feel less anxious about the future, can feel really good and reassuring. But if we try and force ourselves into a particular way of being, you know, people say, oh, don't worry about it. Just focus on what's going right. Just focus on everything that you're doing right. And there's this pressure to be positive all the time, then that's not actually going to be helpful for us at all. And it's also not helpful if our mind is stuck in the future rather than in the present. As we talked about, that's a way for us to feel out of control. So it's also not helpful if it's focused on what we can't control versus what we can control. So I've been referencing this a little bit today, the tyranny of positive thinking. Is this something that you guys have come across before, this idea, tyranny of positive thinking? Yeah. And it's kind of when, you know, you get told, oh, don't worry about that, just be positive, you know, just keep going. Don't feel bad, you've just got to be positive because actually your treatment depends on it. And it's really unhelpful. Very unhelpful, and it was actually based on this rogue study that was done in the UK in the 90s where they got a whole bunch of women with breast cancer and they just did a correlational analysis, which means they just got a bunch of data sets and they mashed them together and found something that was a significant outcome. The outcome was that in this particular study, women who had hopeful, positive outlooks appeared to survive longer or do better with treatment than women who had more negative outlooks. And the world went crazy for this. The media loved it, they ate it up, it was reported everywhere. But then, all around the world, hundreds of times, researchers tried to replicate this study and no one was able to. Media didn't eat that up, the media didn't report that, and a lot of our ideas about cancer and positive thinking have kind of come from this space. So the research isn't there to back the idea that positive thinking is going to lead to better outcomes for you, but it still leads people to think that if you have cancer, you have to think positive all the time, which is really really hard to think super positively when you've just been told that you have, you know, what is a very scary diagnosis. So, what we don't want is positive rose-coloured glasses. That's actually not going to help you. It's not going to soothe your anxiety because your brain will know that you're kind of just putting on your Pollyanna. What we need is helpful thinking. We need realistic thinking. And so we can kind of do that by focusing on goals. So my first priority is to continue to help myself recover after my treatment. I have to be fair to myself. That's a balanced, realistic thought. Reducing self-blame for ourselves. It's normal to feel upset, and it's not a sign of weakness. It's part of a normal reaction to being diagnosed with ovarian cancer. We want to do a balanced view. Being unable to do some things while I recover is frustrating, but I can cope with frustration. This is time limited. So we're wanting to kind of coach ourselves rather than criticise, which we sometimes can do, where we think, I shouldn't be feeling this way, I shouldn't be thinking this way. This isn't, there's plenty of people who have it worse off than me, but we can kind of use that like a big stick, and that just ends up wearing us out. So helpful thoughts, a few ideas. Use your own words. You want the replacement thought to the very fearful thought to be realistic and helpful, and it needs to be believable. We're wanting to coach rather than criticise. And the very first step, which I mentioned before, is that we need to be aware of what we're saying to ourselves in order to kind of change difficult thinking. So, how do we do that? Writing down our thoughts can be a good way to start, because then it gives us a little bit of perspective. It gets our thoughts, which happen like that, out of our head and onto a page. It's not an impression, it's a sentence. And then we can kind of look at what we've written down and say, wow, is that really what I think, or do I just feel like that might be true? You can start to think, are there any errors that I'm making? Am I ignoring or missing parts of the picture because my threat mode is all on better safe than sorry? Is it going to help me to think this way? And is this how I'd speak to a loved one? This is actually my very, very most favourite way of challenging thinking, and this is what I use for myself all the time. I think of someone that I love very much, and I say to myself, well, if such and such was thinking this way, what would I say to them? And often that's a highway to our self-compassion. That's a highway to our soothing mode, and that helps us to really connect with and feel differently about whatever it is that we might be worrying about. Usually, if it's someone that we love and care for, we would validate how they're feeling. We'd say, yeah, it makes sense to me that you feel this way. A lot of people would feel this way. We'd reassure them, it's okay to feel the way that you're feeling. And we'd encourage them. But this is what you really need to focus on to get through this challenge. So it's not about saying, oh, it's okay, don't worry about it. It's about saying, okay, there are some hard things we need to do, but this is how we're going to do it together. Okay, and so these are just some kind of examples of different types of thought and unhelpful kind of ways that we can think. And then we've got the more helpful version down the bottom. So for example, with self-blame and guilt, I'm stupid and hopeless for feeling upset. I should not be feeling this way. I should get on with it and go back to normal. Reducing self-blame, it's normal to feel upset. It's not a sign of weakness. It's part of a normal reaction to a stressful situation. Scare tactics and what ifs. What ifs are the big one. They're the big one that comes up for most people. Now I've finished treatment, I know the cancer will probably come back. What if the cancer comes back? And so then we kind of focus on the positive. So I can't worry about something that hasn't happened yet. I feel well now, I'll take one day at a time, I'm doing everything that I can to look after myself, all of those sorts of things. Catastrophizing, everything will fall apart and be awful, and I can't do everything in the house that I want to. A balanced view, being able to do some things is frustrating, but I can cope with that. I will focus on what I can do. Now, today we've talked a little bit about mindfulness, we've talked a little bit about challenging thinking, and these are helpful things to kind of think about, definitely. But there's also support if you're wanting to develop these skills for yourself. So the service that I work for is a cancer counselling service, and we're a specific psycho-oncology service for anyone in Queensland who's distressed by cancer. So that's cancer patients, their family and friends. And we offer telephone counselling across the state. Anyone can access us. And we have face-to-face counselling here in Brisbane, on the Gold Coast and in Cairns. We also do some really awesome mindfulness meditation programs. They don't run super frequently anymore. But if you are interested, you can have your name popped on a wait list and we'll call you when the next one's about to come up. We also do some little brief mindfulness tasters, and there's an introduction to mindfulness meditation which is coming up in the next couple of weeks. It's an hour course on a Wednesday, so if anyone's interested, I can grab a flyer and have some of those around as well. There might even be flyers here already. So it's free, it's brief. We kind of offer up to around 5 sessions at a time, and it's all staffed by qualified psychologists. Oh, if you want to use any of these services, please contact the helpline on 13 11 20. Okay, so to summarise, and I'm only 3 minutes late, it's really about reminding yourself that it's normal to feel however you're feeling. You're a human being, and all human beings experience all of the feelings all of the time. You're not alone in your experience. However you're feeling, there is someone out there in the world who has felt exactly the same way that you have at some point in time. I guarantee it. There's too many of us for it not to be true. Talk about letting go of the struggle with what is. This quote, I didn't actually, when I went through and redid these slides, I didn't actually see this quote in there. And a lot of people get a lot of comfort from this idea. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I mean, it's a great tenet. But also it just reminds me of Serenity Now on Seinfeld. Have you guys seen that episode, Serenity Now? Oh, it's pretty good. You should catch up on vintage Seinfeld. George's dad loses his mind. We've also talked about practicing opening up to difficult thoughts and feelings instead of trying to just push them down and get rid of them. I'm wondering if anyone's still thinking about a polar bear. I hope so. And we're trying to also normalise that there are other ways that we can work on our thinking, and we don't really need to be positive all the time because it's not going to help. So, the end.